The United States government spends over $6 trillion every year. That's roughly $18,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. But have you ever wondered how these massive spending decisions actually get made? Who decides how much money goes to the military versus education? Or why we seem to have a budget crisis every few years? Let's start with the basic framework. The U.S. Constitution gives Congress what's called the power of the purse. Article 1, Section 9 states that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. In plain English, this means the government can't spend a single dollar without Congress authorizing it. This separation of powers is critical. While the president may propose a budget, only Congress can actually approve spending. This creates an inherent tension in our system, especially when different parties control the White House and Capitol Hill. So how does a federal budget actually come together? The federal budget follows a yearly cycle that begins roughly 18 months before the actual fiscal year starts. The government's fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 30th, not January to December like the calendar year. The process typically unfolds in 4 main stages. First, federal agencies submit funding requests to the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. Second, the president compiles these requests into a comprehensive budget proposal, usually released in February. Third, Congress develops and passes its own budget resolution, setting overall spending limits. Finally, Congress passes specific appropriations bills that provide actual funding for government operations. Let's look more closely at the president's role. Every February, the president submits a massive budget proposal to Congress, often spanning thousands of pages. This document outlines the administration's priorities and serves as a starting point for negotiations. The president's budget includes detailed spending recommendations for every federal agency, tax proposals, economic forecasts, and projections for future deficits or surpluses. However, and this is crucial to understand, the president's budget is essentially a sophisticated wish list. Congress has no obligation to follow these recommendations, and often produces a very different final budget. Now let's see how Congress handles its constitutional responsibility. After receiving the president's proposal, Congress begins its own budget process, which involves several key steps. First, the House and Senate budget committees each craft a budget resolution. This isn't a law, but rather a framework that sets overall spending limits called 302A allocations. Next, these budget resolutions must be reconciled and passed by both chambers, creating a unified congressional budget plan. Then comes the real work. The appropriations committees in both the House and Senate divide these spending limits among 12 subcommittees, each responsible for different parts of the government. These become the 302B allocations. Each subcommittee then drafts an appropriations bill for its area, like defense, transportation, or healthcare. Ideally, all 12 of these bills should pass both chambers and be signed by the president before October 1st when the fiscal year begins. But here's where things often break down. If Congress fails to pass some or all appropriations bills by the deadline, they must pass a continuing resolution or CR to prevent a government shutdown, or agencies without funding must cease operations. This brings us to one of the most confusing parts of the process. Not all federal spending goes through the annual appropriations process. The budget is actually divided into 2 main categories. Discretionary spending, about 30% of the budget, includes funds that Congress must appropriate each year, covering everything from defense and education to scientific research. Mandatory spending, about 70% of the budget, happens automatically based on existing laws. This includes entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, and interest on the national debt. Congress doesn't vote on this spending annually, it continues unless Congress changes the underlying laws. This distinction explains why, despite regular budget battles, much of government spending continues regardless of deadlines or shutdowns. Now what happens when the system doesn't work as designed? In recent decades, the budget process rarely follows the ideal timeline. When deadlines are missed, several scenarios can unfold. Continuing resolutions, CRs. These temporary measures maintain government funding at current levels for a specified period, giving Congress more time to negotiate. Some fiscal years have seen multiple short-term CRs. Omnibus bills. Instead of passing 12 separate appropriations bills, Congress sometimes combines them into a massive omnibus package, often thousands of pages long with limited time for review. Government shutdowns. If neither a regular appropriations bill nor a CR is passed, affected agencies must cease non-essential operations until funding is restored. Debt ceiling crises. Separate from the budget process, Congress must periodically raise the debt ceiling to allow borrowing for spending it has already approved. Failure to do so risks defaulting on existing obligations. The federal budget process reflects our constitutional system of checks and balances. It's complex, often messy, and frequently falls short of its ideal implementation. But it represents the ongoing negotiation between competing priorities in a diverse democracy. Understanding this process helps us better evaluate claims about government spending and hold our elected officials accountable for their fiscal decisions. After all, it's our money they're allocating, all $6 trillion of it. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you like our news clips.